let's get going. Okay, so we might just have a few more people trickling in, but let's just get going this morning. Thank you all so much for coming along. A really warm welcome to this Flexibility Works webinar on how to improve recruitment in line with the new flexible working legislation. So I'm Lisa Gallagher, one of the co-founders of Flexibility Works, and I'm joined this morning by the Flexibility Works team, Nikki Sloy, Laura Jane, Jenny and Alison. Seen lots of familiar faces, but we've got some new friends with us today as well, so welcome to all of you. For those of you who might not know Flexibility Works, we provide consultancy support, training, insight, and really a community for employers to help you create the best possible flexible working culture for your organisation. And we believe this is good for people and it's good for your organisation. So whether you're old pals or new ones, welcome to everyone. And a huge thank you to our sponsors and supporters who help to make these events possible. So that's Scottish Water, Pursuit Marketing, Quorum, Network Resources, Arnold Clark and the Scottish Government. And they're all really our allies, I guess, and to help to share good practice, information and ideas to help you all create the best possible working culture for your businesses and your organisations. So thank you so much to our sponsors. In terms of the event format and logistics for this morning, as you know, the law on flexible working is about to change. And today, yes, we're going to talk about the new legislative changes in general, but very specifically, we'd like to focus on what changes organisations can and should be making to recruitment processes, okay? Because the new legislation will require us, of course, to offer flex from day one. But what we're encouraging at Flexibility Works and to enable employers to get ahead of the curve is rather than wait to discuss flex on day one of employment, but be an exemplar employer and really think about advertising jobs as flexible to open up your job roles to the best possible talent pool. I was actually just speaking to a lawyer last week who was looking for a senior part-time role and was just seeing very few part-time flexible options for her, and it was really holding her back from applying. So a really experienced person who employers were potentially missing out on. So we want to help all of you as employers to make sure that you're making the most of recruiting flexibly and realising the benefits of doing so and really opening yourselves up to that, the best possible talent pool. Okay, so we're here until 11 o'clock, and in that time I'm going to briefly share some insights from our research, and then we're going to hear from two fantastic speakers. So we have Jennifer Wright, who is a Principal Associate in the Employment team at Shoosmiths, and she's also one of our board members. We're very lucky to have Jen on our board. And then we've got Kirsten Urquhart, who is Chief Exec of Young Scot, which is a great organisation, and Kirsten has so much to say on this topic. So we look forward to hearing from Jen and Kirsten in just a moment. There'll be loads of time for questions at the end from all of you. So if there's something that you would like to ask or something that comes to mind as we're talking, please put your question in the Q&A function. If you've got a comment or something that you would just like to generally say, pop it in the chat and we will bring those up later on. So lots to cover. Before we get going, we'd like to invite all of you actually to take part in a bit of a poll, get a bit of a temperature check for the virtual room. And we're keen to find out what might be stopping you, if anything, from offering more flexible working during the recruitment process. Okay, so Laura Jane's just popped up a wee poll there on screen. And if you wouldn't mind popping your vote in there, that would be great. Okay, I'll give you all a couple of seconds just to do that, if that's okay. Okay, so the question up on screen, is there anything stopping you from offering more flexible working during recruitment? Just pop your answers in there. Okay. All right, Laura Jane, you let me know when we're ready to close that.
Just a few more seconds, just waiting for 2 or 3 people.
Lovely.
Okay, I think we're good. I'll close that and we'll reveal the results later.
Great, thanks so much for doing that. Great stuff. Okay, so before I hand over to the speakers, I just wanted to briefly share some of our insights on some of this stuff, just to put what our speakers are going to say into a bit of context. Okay, so in terms of who has flex overall in Scotland at the moment, our research shows that 61% of Scottish workers already work flexibly, and that's up from 46% before the pandemic. So that's taken a bit of a jump, as we might expect. Of those who don't work flexibly in Scotland, 21% would like to work flexibly. So that means in total, 82% of Scottish workers have or want flex. That's 82%, the majority of Scottish workers, okay? Employers that we spoke to too in our research who offer flexible working are generally pretty positive about it too. So just under 3/4 of businesses say that flex has been good for their business. About 70% thinks flex can boost Scotland's economy. So it's not just about being good for your business and your people, actually it has that wider benefit for Scotland's economy too. Just under half think employee productivity has improved because of flex. And about 1/4 of the employers that we spoke to said it leads to better recruitment outcomes as well. Okay, but despite all of this, less than 1/3 of Scottish job adverts mention flexible working. And here's the really interesting thing too, I think. So about 3/4 of employers that we spoke to say that they mention flexibility in their adverts. So something's going on here. There's a bit of a disconnect here between what employers maybe think or believe that they're doing and actually what the evidence shows in those few numbers of Scottish jobs being advertised as flexible. So we know that 82% flex is really important to many, many people in Scotland, and it often beats salary as a top priority when job searching. But 1/4 of people said that they would not apply for a job if it didn't mention flex. There's that apprehension, that anxiety. It's not there, I just can't apply. Okay. And when talking to the unemployed cohort within our research, just under half said that having some flexibility was the single most important factor to them in a job search. And probably not surprisingly, this increases for women to about 2/3. Really, really important. They said that was essential for them when looking for finding a job. And both through our research and through the Women Returners programmes that we run, we know that when the employer doesn't advertise a job as flexible or talk about it at interview, people feel very uncomfortable talking about it, or worse still, they just don't apply at all. So there's a real opportunity here, we believe, for employers not only to be legally compliant with the new legislation and that day one flex, and yes, Jen, of course, being legally compliant is very important, but really to go above and beyond that compliance to look at recruiting flexibly and advertising jobs very clearly with what flexibility is available to that role. And of course, that flex will look a little bit different from job to job, from role to role. And doing that, I suppose, it's not just because what people want, although they do, but because there's business benefits to you as an organisation. And we'll hear from Kirsten from her experience in a wee minute. So we really hope that today the session will encourage you to explore this a little bit more. Take a look at your recruitment approach, your website, your socials. Are you showcasing yourself as a truly flexible employer, or might there be some tweaks or changes that you might want to make? So that's just setting the scene, and I'm going to hand over now to Jen Wright, who is Principal Associate in the Employment team at Shoosmiths. So Jen, over to you.
I don't want to make that false start of having myself on mute, which there's always somebody at an event, isn't there? Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much to Lisa for that introduction and to the team at Flexibility Works for inviting me along today. This is obviously a subject matter really close to my heart, given my role with Flexibility Works, and I also benefit from a flexible work pattern, and I know how important it is for employees and employers alike. So the purpose of my section this morning is just to give an overview of what the changes are. What does it look like? What's happening in April, and what do employers need to be aware of? And then to talk a little bit about what I think we need to do in the recruitment space So what are the changes? So from the 6th of April, there's going to be a change to the laws that govern flexible working. The headline grabber, the thing that's caught attention and generated the most press coverage, is the introduction of a day one right to request flexible working. What this means is that the current requirement to have 26 weeks service before you can make a flexible working request will fall away. And that's probably the most significant of the changes that are being made as of April. The other changes include, and don't worry too much about writing this down, I know we're going to follow up afterwards with an overview of what the changes are, just to spare you scribbling away as I speak. But when making a request, an employee is no longer going to have to explain the effect, if any, on that the employee thinks the change will have to the employer and how that effect might be dealt with. This effectively removes some of the onus that I think was initially felt to be on employees to show how the flexible working arrangement was going to actually fit within a business, and that requirement is not going to exist as of April. The limit on an employee only making one flexible working request in any 12-month period is also being replaced by the ability to make two, recognising that the individual circumstances change and perhaps one in every 12-month period isn't quite sufficient to capture the flexibility that comes with life demands and is necessitated by life demands, and that is a change that employers are going to be have to be ready to deal with. An employer will not be permitted to refuse a request unless it has been the employee has been consulted. I suspect most employers, and probably a lot of the individuals and employers that are on the call now, would already be carrying out some sort of consultation exercise when a flexible working request is made. And what this change does is really enshrine it in law, so it becomes a requirement to have a discussion. And I think that's really just a reflection of good practice. And the final main change is that the time period for an employer to make a decision is going to be reduced from the current 3 months to 2 months, although it will be open to parties to agree a slightly longer period of time if they feel it's necessary. So they're the main changes in a nutshell. So what should employers be doing to prepare? Well, a good starting point, and I don't think I'd be a lawyer without telling you to go back and have a look at the paperwork, is to make sure your flexible working policy is up to date. It's no doubt something that lots of employers have, but possibly isn't something, because there hasn't been significant change in the law in recent years, that you've had cause to look at, to check if it's up to date, particularly with new legislative changes, and to see if it fits with the way your business is currently operating. So that's a really good starting point to make sure all your internal processes are compliant. Have we got the right rules in place in terms of process, consultation, and length of time for responses to be made to a flexible working request when one is received? For both existing and in new roles, I think it's worth thinking about the flexible working options that might be on offer. What would work if someone asked for it? What wouldn't work? If it can't work, or if there's concerns about how something would work, is there anything that can be done or any discussions that can be had? And while we can't crystal ball gaze as to the types of flexible working requests that employees may make, and reminding ourselves that flexible working is more than hybrid working, are there any things that can be done to minimise the need for requests to be made, for example, flexi time or hybrid working being more established within an organisation? If there are roles, and we know there are roles that are harder to shape around certain types of flexible working, is it worth having a think about what can be done for those roles versus for areas that there might be more challenge or things that we might need to think a bit more about? This impending change in the law, like anything, when it's given a bit of publicity, I think we can expect more employees to ask about it and to come forward with requests. And so I think one thing that employers can do is brief managers, brief those who may be in the front line of requests from the staff base as to what the process is, what they should expect, and what they should do when an employee makes a request, making sure they're channeled, whether that's an HR team or another line of management. Being on the front foot can really help these conversations get off to a good start, and to get the most out of the discussions that take place. One thing that I want to say at this point as well is that sometimes with flexible working, a common concern that can be raised when speaking to employers is, oh my goodness, what do I do if everybody asks for the same thing? In reality, in my experience, that's highly unlikely to happen. It's unlikely that everybody within a team or within an organisation is going to want and ask to do the same thing, or that requests will come in that are heavily in conflict with one another. What hasn't changed in the law for the benefit of employers and making things work for businesses is the ability to have a trial period, or the ability to have a discussion with an employee if what's proposed feels problematic, or there are maybe things that can be done to adjust or change what's being asked for. And also, obviously, we'll all endeavour to do what we can to make a flexible working request work, but there is still the opportunity to refuse a request if it simply isn't going to work for business, and the grounds for refusal remain the same. There's been no change to those. So this isn't a change that puts employers entirely at the mercy of employee requests. It's really about finding the right balance between employees' right to work flexibly and the extension of that entitlement to a day one right, and employers' responsibilities to keep businesses and organisations running. Obviously, the purpose and focus of today's session is on recruitment. So a couple of my thoughts on what we do in the recruitment space. The day one right is obviously the headline grabber, but I think as Lisa's alluded to in her introduction, that's almost too late, because in order to get the benefit of this new legislation and the benefits that we're expecting to come in terms of the pool that jobs will be available to if there's an increased availability of flexible working from day one, these discussions, it's really essential that these take place before that day one engagement at the point of recruitment. It makes good business sense to have these discussions at a formative stage so that the role and the employment relationship can be shaped to suit both parties. One of the benefits of making flexible working something that can be asked for from day one is that the hope is it's going to remove some of the inhibitions that individuals feel moving job if they've got a flexible working pattern in place with a current employer that really suits them, their life and their needs. And the hope then being that the pool then opens for those individuals not to feel impeded. And we know a lot of women, in particular mothers, benefit from flexible working patterns, and it can be a complete impediment to changing role if that flexibility would be lost upon taking up new employment or something that they weren't able to apply for until they've attained 26 weeks service. In reality, however, waiting to day one may still pose too significant an impediment or a risk to those who may otherwise be inclined to take up an opportunity if it would impact the demands on childcare or other caring responsibilities in the individual's life. And that's why I think in order for employees to benefit from this wider pool of candidates and to really expand out the pool of individuals that might be interested in roles that are being advertised, talking about flexibility as part of the recruitment exercise is really going to be critical. And I think it's an area where really important results could be gained for employers. If recruiting in this way encourages, for example, more applications from women and increases greater mobility in that demographic of our workforce, it will hopefully ultimately yield positive results in terms of gender pay gap reporting and representation of women in senior management. And this can be a really key part of employers' diversity and inclusion agendas and objectives. So that's a little bit from me in terms of the changes, some of the things that I'd be recommending that employers do to prepare for them, and a little bit of my thought on how this interrelates with the recruitment process. So handing back over to Lisa, and I think we're going to hear from Kirsten.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Jen. That's great. I hope everyone has found that as clear as I did about going through what those changes are. But more than that, the importance actually just of that conversation, that discussion. That's what I took from what you were saying, Jen, that conversation at the point of hire. Let's not wait till day one. Let's make that a conversation at the point of recruitment so that the needs of the individual and the business can be discussed before that appointment is made. I think that's super helpful, really practical and common sense. Thank you so much, and we'll come back to you at the Q&A part. Thank you, Jane. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Kirsten, who is the Chief Exec of a great organisation called Young Scot. And a reminder just to pop your questions in the Q&A, and if you've got any comments on what Jen has already said and what Kirsten's about to say, pop them in the chat function. Kirsten, over to you.
Thanks so much, Lisa, and thank you to Flexibly Works for having me along today. It's a real privilege to come and chat to you today about our approach to flexible working. So yes, I'm Kirsten Urquhart, I'm the Chief Executive of Young Scot, and for those of you who don't know, Young Scot is a charity that supports young people across Scotland. We've been going for about 40 years, and we're probably best known for the Young Scot National Entitlement Cards. We offer discounts and information and volunteering opportunities for young people. So we have a staff base of about 35 to 45 people. It kind of fluctuates depending on projects and things that we have at the time. And like most organisations, excuse me, we have been on a bit of a journey in terms of our approach to work and approach to flexibility, and a lot of that was prompted through the kind of COVID period. We're also a very well-being focused organisation, and that makes a lot of, it kind of influences a lot of the decisions we make about the way that we work as an organisation. Much like Jennifer mentioned, I'm also somebody, excuse me, my voice is gone. I'm also somebody that benefits from a flexible working environment. So I often talk about I work for Young Scot too, and I'm also I have caring responsibilities, and so the flexible working approach really benefits me as a chief executive of an organisation. So what I'm going to do today is tell you a wee bit about what kind of flexible working means to us as an organisation, some examples of how that works in practice. So I'll just run through some of these, and again, kind of opportunity to take any questions at the end. So first and foremost, as an organisation, we operate in a hybrid working environment. That we feel that gives us the setup to work successfully and to provide that flexibility to our team members. And we feel that a remote setup kind of serves us well. And that's partly because we are a charity, we're a third sector organisation. So being able to maximise resources to mean that we don't need this kind of large physical office space has been really beneficial to us as an organisation. So we don't actually have that kind of vast office space to accommodate every member of staff. But that allows us to have that flex and adapt to the different working environments. And it allows us to, even things like the recent weather disruption, it means that we're very well set up, so it has very little impact on the way that we work in terms of operate as an organisation. Given that today is part of thinking about the kind of recruitment process, we encourage all staff to request a working pattern that suits their home, caring and wellbeing commitments as part of recruitment, and we offer this from day one. So despite of kind of changes to legislation, we have offered this as an organisation from day one. And we do this as part of our overall recruitment process. So if you go onto our website just now, I'll pop something in the chat later on, you'll see our kind of work with us section, and in that it outlines all the different kind of flexible working approaches that we have available to team members, kind of new and existing. So those options kind of vary. So we offer things like part-time working, we offer staggered hours, compressed hours, term time working, job sharing. We offer career breaks, but also thinking about things like phased retirement, so your opportunity to start working part-time as you moved into phased retirement. And these are all outlined on our website as part of our recruitment process. And as it stands as an organisation, 70% of our workforce have a flexible working arrangement as it currently stands. So the majority of our organisation work flexibly. And I would say that majority of that is actually compressed hours. That is something that tends to be the kind of main request. And obviously, like kind of Jennifer said, we take all of these flexible working requests and assess them against the needs of our organisation. But we really do feel that kind of flexible approach has a huge number of benefits for us, which I'll go on to talk about. Whilst we've also got these kind of formal kind of working arrangements, flexible working arrangements, we also, as a wellbeing organisation, offer things like design your day options, which means that particularly we do this during the winter months when there's not a lot of daylight. We kind of say design your day to make sure you can take a longer lunch break. And I'm a very keen advocate of getting outdoors and getting some sunlight and getting some vitamin D, and I like to practice what I preach, so you'll maybe see me kind of sharing going out for a walk at lunchtime and things, but it's actually about making sure that we are focusing on the well-being of our organisation, our team members. Things like we offer time for getting healthcare appointments. Kind of, you don't have to take annual leave. Your Design Your Day allows you to think about, you know, if you've got a healthcare appointment or a dentist or some kind of appointment, you can design your day to allow that to happen. And that's something that you would just tend to have a bit of a discussion with your line manager about. It doesn't require that very formal structure. However, if that's something that you did want to then move on to have a formal discussion with your line manager about a flexible working request, that's something that allows you to kind of trial that a bit as well. As an organisation, Young Scot is actually the first third sector organisation to be accredited with Living Wage, Living Pension and Living Hour Awards. We've just been accredited kind of this month, and this really it reflects our approaches to fair work. So we don't have things like 0-hour contracts or anything like that as part of our Living Hour awards. We also promote kind of team development. So with this flexible approach, obviously there's things that we have to look at to ensure that we're still building capacity and building skills as a team. So we do things like, we're quite intentional about the time that we spend together because of our flexible working and our hybrid working environment. And we host kind of monthly team meetings. We have weekly check-ins, full team online. We have a regular development programme, which includes annual training fest. So we have 2 days of dedicated time that we all come together as a team and we do lots of training together. And some of that's about skills development, but it's also about spending time together in this kind of environment. It's a way of us, the kind of social aspect of work and building relationships as well. In addition to that, we offer 2 development days, which team members can use for whatever they want. So it might be something to do with their role, but it could equally be flower arranging that they feel would be a good skill that they want to develop and it'd be good for their personal growth. So we offer 2 development days as well as our kind of flexible working options. We have a very supportive board around this, who are very supportive around looking at flexible working arrangements. And we recently, this financial year, had a working group which was made up of staff members, which looked at all of our flexible working approaches. It looked at all of our kind of I suppose kind of benefits package. We did a big benchmarking program as part of that as well to make sure that we are remaining kind of as attractive as we can be as an employer that has that kind of flexible wellbeing approach. So why do we do this? So I think it's really we really acknowledge and recognise the kind of changing work environment. What people want and need from work is evolving. We really kind of lean into that, and I think that our flexibility approach, we believe, kind of reflects the life balance aspirations of many people now in this kind of post-COVID environment, and really thinking about how this kind of flexibility really supports people for work to fit into their life and not the other way around, if that kind of makes sense. But we're also very mindful of the realities for people. I mean, the cost of living crisis is real for people. This flexibility that we have allows for us to think about how we support things like commuting costs, time costs to people. So having a bit more of a flexible work approach means that people might be able to commute if they have to kind of out with peak hours. It allows them to think about if they've got caring commitments, how they're able to work around that as well. But cost is a real issue, and particularly for Young Scot, we have quite a young workforce where Young Scot is sometimes their first professional job, and we know the real pressures on particularly young people around that affordability. The third sector, the charity sector, is also kind of, I suppose, what you think of traditionally a bit of a kind of lower paying sector. We often can't compete with some of the big salary ranges that happen maybe in more of the kind of private sector or government sector. So our flexibility offer is a really great way of us being able to attract talent to our organisation. And like I said, we're very transparent, very upfront about that flexibility as part of our recruitment process. But we feel that it gives us that bit of a competitive edge in terms of being able to attract people to come and work with us. And we have actually seen this play out in kind of real life. So we feel that it's given us a lot more of a diverse kind of workforce and talent pool. And the data that we have kind of backs this up. So over the past couple of years, as we've been moving to this kind of flexible approach, we are seeing a much more diverse range of diverse workforce, a diverse range of talent, and coming from all over Scotland as well, which really benefits us as a kind of national Scottish charity. We're seeing that we do a annual staff survey with our team that we share with our board. It's all transparent and we share with our board, but we're seeing a kind of greater satisfaction, kind of job satisfaction rate from our team. Our data showing less sickness and absence too, because we have that flexibility that is built in. We know, I'm very much of the view that people have a job to do. They know what they have to do. We trust them to do that job, and we trust them to do that in the space and the arrangements that we've kind of worked with them as well. And we are actually seeing this play out in the number of applications that we're getting to come and work at Young Scot. So we had just had a job close last night, and we've had 80 to 100 applications for one role within Young Scot. Now, I'm the poor soul that has to go through them tonight and tomorrow, but actually that I feel kind of bucks the trend in terms of what you're hearing about how it's kind of difficult to recruit at the moment. Now, as I say, I don't know the quality of all of those applications, but what we're seeing is there's a real desire to come and work for us as an organisation, and I'm confident that the flexibility piece of that kind of really plays into that desire to come and work with us. Again, our staff survey kind of shows that we feel, or the sense that I get, that people are kind of motivated to work for us because we give something back as part of where we're mindful of that life balance. Of course, there's been some, I wouldn't say challenges, but we've had to have some agility in terms of our approach to flexible working. There's some things that we've learned along the way. And we have had to look at almost kind of implementing some kind of core days that we have, that we try and have most people available, kind of working on set days that allow us to be able to do things like come together as a team. I'm not talking about core hours during that day, but days where we're at least some of us are kind of working at the same time that allow us to have our team meetings, and that coordination can definitely be challenging when you're working with a wide range of working patterns, but actually it's important for us to do that. We're very intentional about thinking about when we run team sessions and things as well. I'm also, like I said, I'm kind of mindful that for, like I said, a lot of our workforce is young. Quite often this is their first job, and I'm very thoughtful about the skills development you get as part of being, it's the skills that you learn from being around other people, and so we are again very thoughtful and intentional about the things that we do to support and develop our staff team, particularly for those that do work remotely or work in different working patterns, how we make sure that we pay attention to the culture of the organisation, as well as that. I think it's also worth mentioning that as a youth, an organisation that is getting insight from young people all the time is part of what we do. I'm very tuned into that. I mentioned that kind of changing work environment for people, and the aspirations that I'm hearing from young people about what they want from employability. And some of that is not their choice, it's the external environment that's affecting that. So when I talk to young people, their kind of aspirations around home ownership is definitely more challenged. Choices that they're making around starting families and things. The fact that they're maybe working in more a kind of gig economy where they're taking on multiple roles or side hustles, or things that work with their lives. I think as employers, we have to lean into that. We have to understand what the upcoming workforce is looking for in employability, because the things that we work for, the things that we aspire to, are different or are changing because of external environment. So what is your organisation doing to kind of listen and tap into the changing needs of the workforce? And flexible working is part of that, to allow some of this, some of their own aspirations to come to fruition. So I think an important thing for an organisation is that we're always kind of listening and learning and doing horizon scanning and paying attention to what's coming ahead. So I'll stop there, because I could keep going on, but I think hopefully that's just given you a bit of a flavour in terms of an organisation that is kind of actively embracing flexible working. Yes, there is some things that we will have to do in terms of legislation, just to make sure we have that. We've got a lot of those policies in place, but just that they will reflect some of the changes that I've made. But hopefully there's not a huge amount that we'll have to do as an organisation to adapt and flex. But thank you so much. I'll pass back to Lisa. Thanks.
Thank you. Kirsten, thank you so much. There was just so much in what you said there. I think you've been really generous, actually sharing the absolute detail of what you do and what you offer. I hope everyone has found that very useful in terms of the practicalities, and I can see lots of questions and comments on what you said. I really like that design your day approach. I guess that's about just giving people a bit more autonomy and control over their working lives, which we know is really important to people. And actually there was so much in what you said, but to highlight that last bit about challenging our own mindsets, it's so important during this time. This is a massive change in the way that we all work, the way that work is structured, and understanding, I think you were talking about the mindset of that workforce and the future workforce, I think is such an important message for all of us. We went out actually to meet with an employer the other week, great big employer in Scotland, and that mindset issue was a big challenge for that business and overcoming that. So thank you for sharing that particular point with us. Okay, Kirsten, thank you so much. Jen, thank you to you as well. Nikki, I'm going to hand over to you to reveal the results of the poll and to come to the questions. Thank you all so much for your questions, which have been coming through. Okay.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Kirsten. Really interesting, thorough presentations there. Really great. Thank you. I cannot reveal the poll myself. I need Laura Jane's help with that. So, Laura Jane, are you able to pop that up on the screen, please? So, interesting. Really encouraging to see that so many people here. Now, probably not surprising because you're here, we're talking about flexible working, but really encouraging to see that so many people here are already doing this as part of recruitment, already offering flexible working and doing it right up front. So that's encouraging. The people just not thinking about it, that resonates with me. I see this a lot, and we all see this a lot at Flexibility Works. Even some of the organisations we work with who we know are incredibly flexible for their existing staff, they sometimes just forget just how important this is to put it right up front. So just how important it is for so many people. And it's the difference between someone applying or not applying, but all those lovely benefits that Kirsten spoke about there, and I was like scribbling them down, like, that employer brand, the increase in applications, people want to come and work with you. They want to be associated with your organisation, increasing the diversity. And then obviously when you've got people working in the organisation, they're happier, they're healthier, all of those things. So yes, quite often it is just something that gets a little bit forgotten about. But that's why we're having sessions like this today, just so that we can remind ourselves just how important it is for so many people and just what a massive difference it can make to employers. And some resistance from line management, not very much. So that's really good because line managers are so critical. As Jen said earlier, this change is primarily really, I think, going to affect line managers because those are the folks that are going to be having the conversations with existing staff. And also hiring new people into the organisation. So really important that line managers are up to speed. And from this group, it's looking like we've not got a lot of resistance. So it's probably just about making sure that they're upskilled and ready to have those really good conversations that Lisa mentioned. And resistance from senior managers and exec board, that's quite interesting. And actually, I'm going to be a bit cheeky before I go to everyone else's questions. And I'm going to ask Kirsten and Jen, if you've got any advice, given just how many people are seeing that as an issue, resistance from senior managers and boards against recruiting flexibly, any advice of how organisations can navigate that? Kirsten, come to you first.
I don't know advice. I mean, I think for me, it's about what data and evidence is they're out there, because it's about building that case. And I think it's, like I said, we're able to use some of our insight, things like the range of applications we're getting, things like, our staff surveys that we've implemented, that you start to see that. But there's lots of things that people put out, you know, the work that you do at Flexibility Works. It's about what data and insight can you bring, but also I think that you will over time start to see an impact on those that want to come and engage with your organisation. So it is things like what data can you pull internally about things like candidates, about retention, about leavers, and all these kind of things that actually, you know, we do exit interviews as part of any kind of, you know, kind of somebody moving on for the role. What's the narrative that's coming out? That are you collecting the right things? So I think it's about how do you build that case, because I think I think there's also that bit about that kind of horizon and scanning and tapping into the sentiment of, you know, do your research in terms of what are what are people writing about it, what are blogs saying about it. I think if it just comes off as you're kind of anecdotally saying, oh, I think we should do flexible working, you know, I think there's so much out there now to back up the evidence for that. So that would be my advice, kind of build that case.
Love it. Thank you, Kirsten. Data is king. Head in the heart, really, isn't it? Jen, anything to add to that?
I think I'd absolutely share what Kirsten has said there. I think being able to evidence the real benefits of doing this at the recruitment stage is going to be key to changing attitudes. Obviously, we've got the change in the law. There is going to be a requirement to consider these things from day one anyway. And I think there's an element of being able to persuade and demonstrate to senior management and those that maybe demonstrate a level of resistance that actually it's good for all of us if we have this conversation earlier. It's going to get this relationship off on a smoother footing. And given all of the statistics that we've heard over the course of this morning, the significance of it for either people returning to the workplace who've been away for a period of time or who are looking to move job, this is such a big issue for recruiting the best people to your jobs. And that has to be a good sell for any resistant senior manager or someone at a high level that has a concern. And I think it is reminding that, you know, going back to the point that I made, we don't have to say yes to everything. And I know I want to keep that obviously in keeping with the tone of today, but this isn't a you must absolutely do whatever you're asked. It's starting a conversation that has to work for both the individual and the business. And I think remembering that as you have the discussions with senior management is hopefully a helpful tool in being able to say, well, actually, it's not that everyone just gets what they ask for. It's about having a conversation and making sure it works for everybody.
That's great. Thank you, Jen. Jen, can I just, while I've got you, can you very briefly speak to this question, which is if an employee has children who are under 18 with disabilities, they can request a change to their working pattern to support them. Is this employee automatically covered in the Equality Act?
So a couple of factors, and I'll speak about this at fairly high level, but as you can imagine, any interplay with the Equality Act starts to make things horribly complicated, and we could be here for it for a whole day. The Equality Act comes into play with flexible working because sometimes, in addition to an individual making a flexible working request, they are covered by the Equality Act to the extent that they're entitled to have reasonable adjustments made for them. And what this means is that the request has to be considered against the backdrop of the Equality Act. If, for example, they're making a flexible working request because of their own health reasons, or insofar as those health reasons merited protection under the Equality Act. In terms of if an individual has responsibilities for somebody else or was potentially looking for protection in light of someone else's protected characteristic, that isn't something that automatically trips in terms of the duty to make reasonable adjustments, but can come into play in terms of other aspects of protection under the Equality Act. So it's not a particularly straightforward answer. It's not something that automatically requires an employer to accept a flexible working request or make a change in that space, but there is some consideration to be given under the Equality Act. And there's also some other bits of legislation in terms of responsibility for dependents that might come into the mix in a situation like that. So it's I suppose in short, it's not an automatic consideration. It doesn't enable a reasonable adjustment consideration to come into play if the health issue isn't something that impacts the employee personally. But there are some protections under the Equality Act that kick in relation to associative discrimination. So hopefully that helps. That is quite a complicated subject matter, and so I don't want to speak to people for an hour on that this morning, but hopefully that's useful.
That's great, thank you, Jen. On the question of timing, there's a couple of questions about that. So someone asking if employers have said that they will not offer flexible working in the past, will they now no longer be able to do that? And also on that similar point, obviously bearing in mind the law doesn't change until the 1st of April, what if you get a request between now and then? What are you doing, or what should you be doing in those situations? So previously said no. Does that change anything now going forward? Or what should you be doing with requests between now and April?
So if I deal with the first one of those questions, Nikki, in terms of where we've previously said no, what isn't changing in the law is the ability to make a request for flexible working. So I think it's probably always been a little bit risky for an employer to take a position of there is no flexibility allowed in this role. What is changing is the stage in which it can be requested. So previously we know someone had to have 26 weeks service in order to make a request. From April they're going to be able to ask from day one. What hasn't changed, as I've said, is the ability to have a basis upon which to say no to a specific flexible working request. But I don't think that would ever have safely given an employer an ability to say no, we're absolutely not accepting any flexibility. There might have been reasons why in the past something had been refused because it just wasn't something that could be balanced because it impacted customer demand, or the burden of additional cost was too high, something that would have entitled the ability to say no to that particular flexible working request. But I think there's the kind of blanket position of no flexible working is something that's not changing insofar as it's not being something that could probably safely be adopted as a position up until now anyway. Hopefully that makes sense. In relation to the period from now until April, so as far as it goes from a legal position, my understanding is the law kicks in as at the beginning of April in terms of requests from then onwards. The law doesn't change until then, so the approach is still 26 weeks service, and the parameters around number of requests and time periods for consideration remain as they are until that point in time. I think because we know the change is coming, it's worth employers looking at the requests that are being made in light of what's coming down the track. But if you've got somebody that's making a request that's out with the parameters of the current legislation, it is the current legislation that applies.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Jen. Kirsten, a couple of questions for you, really practical questions. Someone just asking, have you noticed a reduction in absences since you started the flexible approach? And you mentioned a working group made up of staff. What are the sort of terms of reference for that group?
Yeah, so we have definitely noticed a decline in absence. You know, I think in the past where somebody was kind of physically coming into an office, I mean, I think part of that is due to our hybrid working environments as well as kind of flexibility. So the ability for a team member to still feel well enough to maybe log on and do bits and pieces from home rather than kind of traveling or commuting. I mean, I'm somebody as well that has a long-term health condition, so I definitely benefit from being able to work remotely and flexibly as well. So yes, I think in short we've definitely seen a reduction in absences. In terms of the working group, the remit for that was we have a kind of staff wellbeing team, not a team as in they are members of the team that come together in a kind of voluntary capacity to think about wellbeing across the organisation. And they were tasked with, from our board, with and myself as a CEO, looking at engaging around what different flexible working options look at. And that was part of our board was very interested in the 4-day working week, formalising the 4-day working week. So they went off and looked at excuse me, how different organisations kind of operate in terms of their flexible approaches. They spoke to staff members, they spoke to members of the boards and to other kind of team members to think about what does that look like. What we came up with that was actually at the moment, in terms of formalising a 4-day working week, as I say, about probably 70% of our staff team probably do that anyway in terms of their own condensed hours and flexible approaches. We, at the moment, felt like formalising that 4-day working week might actually give less flexibility because you have some people that it works for them to work 5 days a week because they might finish later, finish earlier to do a school pickup or drop off. If we were condensing everything into 4 days, that flexibility, my concern is that flexibility might actually be a bit more challenging for us to achieve. So some of that, we're still looking at that all the time, but that working group was about doing external research. It was about speaking to the internal staff team, and it was about doing desk-based research as well in terms of what are the different options. They put a paper back to the board, and it was agreed that it'd be something that we keep monitoring at the moment for that. So again, like I said, it's about building that case and the data and insight that we can pull back into the organisation.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Kirsten. I think sometimes there's an assumption with a smaller organisation, you know, these things can't happen, or they only really happen in larger organisations. But I think that's testament to the fact that it's so important and absolutely possible to do these sorts of initiatives, bring staff together to lead on this kind of stuff, even in a smaller organisation. So thank you for sharing. And now we've got lots of questions. We're probably not going to get through them all, but there is one that is, I think it's really valid because we've spoken a lot about what employers can do and what managers can do, but this is slightly from the other perspective, and it's about what we, I guess, can do as employers to encourage employees who are putting in requests to think really realistically about, you know, the requests that they're putting in, to start off, you know, having a really positive discussion. Anything that you can suggest that we can do to support, enable employees when they're putting in their flexible working requests to put forward really quite realistic requests and to think about the business as well as their own needs. Jane, Kirsten.
I suppose I'll throw in my tuppence worth to this one. I think getting the conversation off to a good footing would probably be helped by having a really clear line in policies, flexible working policies, about what sorts of things does the employer consider will be really workable? How do they want the conversation shaped? And, you know, setting a bit of a tone within that will hopefully help the conversations that start get off in a really meaningful way. The other aspect of the change in the law is this requirement to consult. Now, as I said, I suspect lots of people did that already when an individual came forward with a flexible working request, but I think that gives a really good opportunity for the employer to have a discussion with the employee if there are bits of the request that are potentially problematic or need to be rethought. That is what you can do in the course of that consultation exercise and explore that, because as I said, you know, this needs to work for both the individual and the business. There are still avenues by which an employer can either implement it for a short period of time as a trial to see if it works, or, you know, ultimately if it really isn't going to work, there's a basis upon which to diffuse a request. But actually getting that conversation going and exploring alternatives, if there are specific aspects of the request that don't work, have that discussion with the individual. And as I say, setting the tone in policy can really help make sure those conversations get off on a good footing, and the internal communications you have around that can be really beneficial, just to make sure the conversation takes place as meaningful as possible.
Yeah, that's good, Jen. Thank you. And I suppose it's like, I always think it shouldn't be a surprise, like a flexible working question just appear. Something's not quite worked in that situation, because you're kind of hopefully going to have a culture where managers and people in their team are regularly talking about working patterns, well-being, what's going on. And, you know, it shouldn't come as a surprise, and almost it's a fait accompli when the request is put in, because you've already had really healthy discussions. But I do think that comes down to managers as well, and, you know, making sure that managers, that they're supported, because a lot of people end up in management positions and they've maybe not had any sort of support, coaching, mentoring, training, but they're expected all of a sudden to know how to have these conversations. So I think it's really important that managers are supported, so that these kind of discussions and conversations are just commonplace. And the flexible working request is the formality. but it shouldn't come as a surprise to the manager. I want to just ask Kirsten one thing that's come through, and we hear this all the time. People are just going to start, they've not quite said it like this, but take the mick. There's still, you know, that sense of people are, you know, managers are just like, oh, I'm just not into this, you know, I've maybe had a bad experience in the past, or staff are just going to manipulate this for their own good. They're not going to care about the business, it's just all about them. Any thoughts on how you're trying to, you know, you've given the data point, but just in a more general sense, how do you build this into the culture that we are a flexible organisation? Any nuggets on that?
I mean, it's definitely, I think it's it comes down to trust, doesn't it? I mean, it's building that kind of trust that you have with your team. I think the other thing around it is that we've had to work really hard on, I suppose, for managers and their team, be really clear about setting what their objectives are, you know, really clear communication about what your kind of role is, what you're expected to deliver, your key performance indicators, your impact. I think, you know, I'm not saying that you never, there's times when it hasn't popped into your head that, you know, is somebody, you know, are they kind of present and things, but that presenteeism, even digital presenteeism, it doesn't necessarily mean that people are doing the work that they're supposed to do. It's like they're busy, but they're busy doing the right things. And for us, it's about being really clear about what the objectives are, building that trust. Because at the end of the day, if the work isn't getting done, that's what's going to be the indicator of that. And that's when it's more, that's what you're addressing. You're addressing the fact the work isn't being done, rather than necessarily the hours that's being carried out in the days and things like that as well. So I think for us, it was definitely been on a kind of journey with that, but it's also about culture you build within your organization. It is, you know, I'm very you know, we talk about it a lot as a team about building that trust, and about the fact that you know, we're all in this together. We talk about Team Young Scot, and if somebody starts abusing the system, then it impacts everybody. We've had it before. We have a toil system, a time off and lose system, because obviously the nature of our jobs is that sometimes you're working weekends or evenings, and certain roles are required to volunteer. And it got to the stage where people were really, you know, they were asking for 10 minutes of toil if they worked 10 minutes. So, and that's when we had to really pull back on that system, because when people start abusing it, that's when it's kind of everybody suffers for that. And that's very much the message. It has to be, you know, a fair and transparent kind of system. But you know, I think it is something, there's a mindset shift between, you know, it used to be very much at your desk, had to be present at your desk 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. The world has changed and shifted, and it is important that everybody gets on board with it. I feel like it's inevitable. So it's really about what are the tools and processes you can put in place to build that trust and process within your organization, rather than trying to fight against it. That's my own personal view on that one.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. So we are now out of time, and really just again want to thank Kirsten and Jen for their talks this morning. Really helpful, really useful, and we want to just, I guess, I hope that you have taken something really practical away from today. We always, when we create these sessions, try and make them practical. So hopefully you've learned something, you've taken something away that will be useful within your organisation. At Flexibility Works, again, being practical, we're like, what could we do to help employers and managers get ready for the new legislation? So we have created a boot camp for managers. It's a half-day session. They can come along as groups, or they can come along as individuals to our open sessions. And we'll just really take them through what is the legislation, but most importantly, what does exemplar best practice look like, you know, in terms of becoming a really great flexible employer and a really great flexible manager. So that's 2 new products. We can share the links to those in the chat. Of course, beyond that, if there's anything related to flexible working that you want to talk about, please do. We talk to organisations day in, day out. We help organisations day in, day out to create successful flexible working cultures, to navigate their challenges. So remember, we're here to help. Our next event will be in person next time, which is great. It will be at the new Barclays campus, and it will be on 26th of March, Tuesday the 26th of March. Again, it's on our website, open for bookings at the moment, and we'll be launching our annual research, Flex for Life. So again, just as many thanks to all of you for coming along today. Thanks for your questions, your interactions. So sorry we didn't get to all the questions. Another thanks to our sponsors, Scottish Water, Pursuit Marketing, Quorum Network Resources, Arnold Clark and Scottish Government. And we do have a very small favour to ask you. It would be really helpful if you could take just a couple of minutes now and to give you your feedback. We've got a very, very short survey. I promise it'll only take you a couple of moments to do. It helps us to keep these events relevant and make sure that what we're doing is of value to all of you and of course of value to our sponsors. So we're going to just pop the link to that survey in the chat just now and try and capture you while you're here. And just have a great day, everybody, and hope to see you at another Flexibility Works event soon.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
very
So
much.
just the people that are left in the room, I've popped that link in if you don't mind, but I also will follow up with an email and some links on what we've talked about today. Thank you again to our fantastic speakers. And with that, I'm going to just end the webinar just now.